Hi, folks. Welcome to, I think it's our 9th videocast. I've got Stuart Lockhead and Jimmy Hutton with me today. And as ever, I think we're just going to start with Nicola Sturgeon's presser on the coronavirus facts, figures, and actions. And then I think we're going to have a wee chat about Craig Murray's blog yesterday. Stuart, do you want to start with the presser?
Yeah, I think, well, overall, to start with, it was a very long one. We actually got to hear the questions from all the journalists, and there were a lot of them. So, overall, the review of the press conference was positive. However, the opening of the opening information at the start was not positive, in the sense that we had a large increase of the positive tests in Scotland. Went up to 1,993. That was an increase of 430, which is a fairly large percentage compared to yesterday. And 13 more deaths, whereas yesterday there was only one more death. And then, so it turned out that there was one lab that wasn't reporting and wasn't included in yesterday's figures, but it does look fairly shocking today. So I've no idea if that'll be used politically later on today. Apart from that, yes, I think I've carry on, guys.
Well, I think what's impressed me about the Scottish press conference is yesterday there was a question asked about the number of people in the National Health Service going off sick, and they didn't have the figures. In her statement today, when she opened up, that was one of the first things she said. We now have the figures. It's 6%. We expect it to go up. So I think their transparency is to be applauded. They certainly seem to be making an effort to answer questions, even questions they don't initially have the answer to. So I'm pleased to see that. The other side of it was this numbers question. It's one of those ones that actually, regardless of what's said, at some point this will come back to bite them. They're being transparent, they're giving the numbers, they're telling you why there was a fault with the numbers yesterday, now being sorted. There was a question asked about whether deaths in the community were being included in the totals, a good explanation of how they're getting over that problem. It seems to be they're relying on what's on the death certificate. So if coronavirus, and we talked about this yesterday, so if coronavirus is a contributing factor and it's noted on the death certificate, it will show up in the stats.
Yeah.
Which is all to the good. And it all seemed very grown up.
Yeah, well, there's been an issue with the English figures and some suggestions of massaging. So the Office of National Statistics has been, or did report this morning, on an extra 40 deaths that hadn't been included in their stats. And that was actually from, I believe, the 20th of March when lockdown kicked in. No, I mean, it's kind of running a bit behind. So they're reporting, although we switched last week to report deaths around the same periods, their reporting's not been quite as accurate down there. So there's still that issue to be kind of ironed out as to why they're using ONS as well as other figures.
Well, I mean, it's a bigger country. They've got more points to bring information in from, so maybe we can give them a bit of leeway. Stuart?
There was, I think, in the course of the questioning today, there was an awkward space in one of the answers, which was about, what was it? But the testing. This is still an ongoing issue in this country, both not just in Scotland but across the UK. We're not getting the testing that's needed, and they're the same north and south of the border. They do evade hard questions about testing. What upset me was that one of the answers that was given them was apparently when it comes to the accurate figures on the deaths in Scotland, they have to wait 28 days from the death certificate being signed. So I'm not sure how accurate the death figures are.
You can't be right there, mate, because if I had to wait for 28 days, we wouldn't be getting any death figures through you.
Well, that's a very good point, Jimmy. That's what I thought.
I think that was a bad explanation. To register a death, you get 28 days. So effectively, I think that might be the problem with deaths in the community. At what point do the family go in? Because it's the duty of the family to do that, to register.
Yeah, well, I had a wee issue with the boy for the Sun. It was nice to see that they made him wait to ask the last question because he works for the Sun. But I had a bit of an issue. I thought it was a bit rich for the Sun to be having a pop about testing, given their massive support for Boris, and the testing problems in the UK emanate from London. I mean, there was a report on Channel 4 News last night where Public Health Wales thought they had secured an agreement with a Swiss company to do 5,000 tests a week, alongside other testing that was getting done, and that just disappeared in a puff of smoke because Public Health England had carpetbagged them and blagged it. So those 5,000 tests will be done in England now rather than Wales.
I didn't catch the detail of that, but it was the Plaid Cymru, leader of Plaid Cymru. I caught sort of a 5-minute, well, not even a 50-second interview with him, and it didn't go into much detail. But tell me if I'm wrong about this. My understanding was that the NHS, England and Wales basically had a joint contract with this Swiss company, and England have decided to take all the tests to themselves.
Yes, that's basically what happened. The Welsh thought they had an agreement to get 5,000 alongside other testing that's getting done. That's not the only company that's testing in Wales, but they expected this company to deliver 5,000 tests a week, and those just disappeared to be done in England.
The other thing about the testing in Scotland, everybody seems to, they want to ask the question, they want it to become an issue. Everybody seems to ignore the fact that the testing that normally goes on, testing for flu, for instance, what they do every year is they test for flu, they send it off to a lab, and then they extrapolate that percentage that comes back positive in as the whole community. That testing's still going on. So in actual fact, coronavirus has been added into that. So there is a population testing. They seem to all want the government to turn around and say, okay, we've got 5.6 million people in Scotland. We're going to test every one of them by Wednesday.
Yeah, the guy for the Sun in particular was, as I say, he was looking to score points in a situation. I mean, they've already said that there are 41 GP surgeries that are involved with the flu test.
Well, that's being ramped up.
And it's going up
Sorry,
to 200,
Jimmy. Sorry, I used the phrase ramped up. I apologise.
Aye, my favourite. Aye, it's going up to 200, or it has gone up to 200. So there will be a decent amount of data there. But they're also, the guy for the Sun was hinting at antibody tests. Sorry, we can't do antibody tests. Nobody's developed one that works right yet.
Well, there will be.
I'm not sure about that, Jimmy. Germany's issuing certificates to people that have had that prove.
No. The Germans have a plan in place to issue certificates once antibody testing is there, so that people can go back to work. They're not actually issuing the certificates yet because the antibody test isn't ready yet.
There will be a way to test for antibodies. There will be a way to do it, but it'll just be like a week to do the test or whatever. What they're looking for is a fast test. You know, and I believe that there's even a self-test for antibodies in the pipeline, but it's only good if it has a high percentage of a low percentage of false positives. So it they have to know it works, or you can end up.
Interesting stuff around Spain and Italy being floating about as well. I was watching a bit this morning. Just things like Spain having a 15% infection rate as opposed to Germany having a 1% infection rate. There's no real science as to why that's the case. There are You know, they're talking about social issues such as the Spanish living in far more generational family groups, for example. And there's an interesting study going on now where are we seeing the same kind of spread from London out to the rest of England that Spain saw from Madrid? Because 3 or 4 weeks ago, something like 60% of Spain's cases were in Madrid.
But look, bear in mind, yes, there is a scientific difference to some extent, because in Germany, they're testing 500,000 people every week.
Yeah, but that doesn't make a difference to how it spreads.
Yeah,
but not where it is, though.
But I mean, does it not depend on who you're actually testing? For instance, somebody asked a question today about the percentage of frontline staff who were showing positive with testing, and it was about 16%. And that's because they're testing people who show symptoms.
Yeah.
So if you're only testing people who show symptoms, you're going to get a higher positive.
You would expect that higher positive, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, think about it though. If they're testing 500,000 people a week in Germany, they're testing more than people that just got symptoms. They're obviously doing random testing.
That's why the German data as well is going to be vitally important to get access to their data, to see how it spreads, see how it gets around, because they've got a massive data set now that no other country in Europe has.
But that surely explains, if they're doing what is essentially random testing, why it's 1%. If Italy's doing testing of people that are showing some sort of symptoms and it's 15%, there's your explanation.
I think we could get, we're getting bogged, let's be honest, guys, we're getting bogged down in figures and tests, and there's there's always going to be arguments about that.
I think that's deliberate, Stuart. I think there's been a lot of figures put out over the last 2 or 3 days to try and get people bogged down in it, rather than to ask certain questions of certain government members.
Well, I mean, what possibly the question that needs to be asked about the whole of the world is, can we all please have one criteria for our statistics?
Never going to happen.
Yeah, but that's the only way you're going to get a clear picture of what countries are succeeding and which countries aren't succeeding, is if you have the same criteria for testing. You're right, well, look, it'll never happen.
It'll never happen. Look, in social science, the most reliable data set that you can ever have is suicides. And even they're controversial.
Yeah, true. What was the other thing we were going to talk about, lads? I think we've done.
But we need to just have a wee word about the emergency law that they are going to pass in one day at Holyrood. I don't think there was anything too controversial in that. There was a question about prisoners. They're taking powers that they're not necessarily going to enforce. And there were 1 or 2 things that it was mostly about testing, I must admit. But they did announce one controversial thing. This might lead on to the next topic that you want to talk about. The First Minister announced that because of the possibility of domestic violence, with everybody being locked down, they're giving $1.5 million to Rape Crisis Scotland.
No, they're splitting it between Rape Crisis Scotland and another
Scottish Women's Aid
organisation.
I'll just leave. I find that a bit controversial at this moment, given what we might be about to talk about.
Yeah, I find the decision of Nicola Sturgeon to highlight that particularly interesting, given everything that's gone on lately. And I do wonder which one of her coterie of backroom staff convinced her to actually highlight that.
Well, for the watchers and listeners, basically yesterday the National published a letter from the women who took Salmond to court through rape crisis.
No, Nori. Every publisher in Scotland published that letter.
Well,
BBC had it up before the National.
Sure, if you let me finish. With the National publishing it, the, shall we say, Salmond side of the independence movement went into meltdown on social media. It seems, as Jimmy says, that it was a pointed use of Rape Crisis Scotland by Nicola Sturgeon. I think that's fair to say.
Oh, absolutely.
Also published yesterday, Craig Murray had a blog, which we've all read. Stuart, what did you think of Craig Murray's blog?
His conclusions are absolutely possible. It's possibly true. He's accusing the Scottish Government, the civil servants, the SNP, the courts, the Procurator Fiscal Service, the Crown Office and the police of corruption.
I don't think it's fair to say he's accusing the courts. I think he made it fairly plain that...
Oh, no, not the courts, you're right, excluding the courts.
The jury and the judge, in his opinion. Well, the judge did a reasonable job. The jury did a very good job. I think
then, no, you're right. Remove the courts, but add in the media.
Yeah, yeah. The blog was actually entitled Je accuse, which is I accuse in French.
Yeah, French is rank rotten, mate. J'accuse.
Sorry. I didn't claim I could speak French, which was mirroring the Dreyfus case in France way back in the day, when a Jewish army officer got wrongly accused of espionage, I think it was.
Yeah, and he got executed as well.
No, he didn't. He got sent to Devil's Island, and he eventually got out. Dreyfus.
Oh, well.
Devil's Island, is that Cramond Island with Mergart?
Aye. And Steve McQueen.
Oh, Barry, he'd be a nice wee cellmate, actually. He's kind of used to it after the Great Escape. Did they have the ball? Did they have the ball in that, Ian?
No, just the Great Escape. The one they allowed balls on Devil's Island. But Craig Murray left nobody with any sort of reputation. He got stuck right in about them.
Aye, hit everybody.
Well, what is interesting is Craig Murray claims to have gone through a similar fit-up when he was in the diplomatic corps, because he basically broke every code there is in the civil service by handing out information about what the British government was up to in the Balkans.
No, it was in Kyrgyzstan.
Extraordinary.
Kyrgyzstan. Yeah. So the first tweet I saw after that was Kenny Farquharson, who many will know writes for The Times, basically poo-pooing what Craig Murray said, and making out he was some sort of conspiracy nut.
It's a bit rich coming for somebody like Kenny Farquharson, who would write any conspiracy theory he could get a hold of against the Scottish government and attach the name The Times to said conspiracy theory to kind of give it some gravitas, when we all know that The Times these days, you would not wrap your chips in that newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, they're all happy enough to speculate on what's happening in the SNP, but
and we're very happy to speculate about things that happened in Butte House, Norrie. They were very happy to speculate about what went on in Butte House until before and during the court case.
Yep, and I find it quite surprising. I find Kenny more reasonable than most of the unionist press. I mean, he's a Devo plus man as far as I can tell. Which means he's still a unionist. But the idea that the British government doesn't play dirty, when you look at what they've done historically, which is Kenny's position, is ridiculous.
Well, look, can I sum this up? I mean, I think Craig Murray's position is that the SNP elite, the top of the SNP, are now no longer regarded as a threat in London, because they have become, instead of the Scottish National Party for Independence, they've become the Scottish Devolutionist Party. And they're quite happy they're not going to seriously attack the SNP, the current SNP membership. On the other hand, Alex Salmond has been a total thorn in the side of London governments ever since he came on the scene. Is that a fair summary?
Of his position?
Craig Murray's.
I'm not sure. I mean, he did state today in a tweet that he had no intention of leaving the SNP, that he was going to fight the good fight from within.
Me too.
And look to alter the people at the top.
Well, I think the Holyrood inquiries will be very interesting, because there's more to come out. Clearly, we all know there's more to come out. And we'll find out who. All right. Tell Becky I said hi.
Sorry about that, folks. The position is kind of, I don't know. I don't know how you can make the accusations against these people who he tells us are at the top of the SNP and continue for them to continue to be anonymous.
No, they can't. They can't be anonymous during the parliamentary inquiry. They just can't.
Well, I'm sorry, they can be, because the courts have said they're not allowed to be named. So you can't go after them. You can't go after them. Well, you can't go after them publicly. You can't name them.
But it's a Holyrood inquiry, mate. You just hear it in camera.
Well, that's kind of my point. My point is that this protection that's been afforded them by the courts is going to extend to inquiries. It's going to extend to not having full information when it comes to voting for people to take up party positions, etc., etc.
Yeah, you're right about that, but it's going to be common knowledge around the party anyway as to who these people are. It's not going to be, they'll not manage, it wouldn't be published, but they'll not manage to keep them anonymous.
But it gives them incredible shielding. As you say, they can't publish their names, so there can't be an argument in the press about whether Fluella de Vil gets to stand against Mrs. H, when Mrs. H's position is untenable for some in the SNP.
Yeah.
So the ramifications of this,
well, that's where
are going to roll on.
That's where it's worked either way. You said it the other day. The whole thing's worked either way for MI5 or whoever it was that is stirring the pot big style and getting Leslie Evans to come up with retrospective disciplinary procedures to actually kick this whole thing off. Because whoever started stirring that pot, whoever poked that hornet's nest, they have created a very, very difficult situation for the SNP. The only unfortunate thing for them is that the people of Scotland still support the SNP regardless, whereas when they kicked this whole thing off, clearly their main intent was to destroy the support for the SNP in the polls, and that's just not happening.
Sure. It's interesting that I think it was Wee Ginger Doug yesterday. He accused the SNP management, asset in the top of the SNP is trying to manage the Yes movement, and they can't do it.
Aye, I'd agree with that. They can't manage their own party at the moment, so they certainly want to manage.
It's been my accusation all along, ever since nearly 10 years. The management at the top has been rubbish.
I think there's a lot to be said for getting these parliamentary inquiries underway very, very quickly, pulling anyone who has anonymity into meetings, getting their side of the story, let them say whatever they've got to say, and then you then go and speak to everybody else openly and publicly.
But the parliamentary inquiry is into basically what did and when did Nicola Sturgeon know.
Yeah, but you're going to have
the only reason for the inquiry, as far as I can tell, is there is some doubt at which meeting she was informed that this was...
No, there are two inquiries going on. One's about that, and the other one's about why on earth we actually raised a disciplinary procedure that was ruled by the highest civil court in Milan to be unlawful and carrying the taint of bias.
Well, our defence to that has to be nothing to do with me. This was a civil service matter.
Yeah, but the Parliament is inquiring into the civil service actions on that.
Well, I thought the only thing that was aimed at Nicola Sturgeon was the inquiry about when she knew what she knew.
Yeah, well, that's a big part of it, mate. But let's be honest, that's for the Tories to stir the pot. We need to know why our senior civil servants went and took this course of action. And we need our senior civil servants to sit in front of parliamentarians and explain themselves to parliamentarians.
I have to take issue.
Evans is on what, the best part of 200 grand a year. She needs to justify why she thought it was proper to appoint our pal to run an inquiry that our pal was actually involved in.
Aye, well, that was that'll come out. I have to take issue with you, Stuart, about the management of the SNP. I'm sorry. Of every political party in the country, they have had the best managers, without doubt. They had the best discipline, which comes through management.
Well, campaign management. They're very good at campaigning, but they're certainly not very good at. They're not actually capable of managing the Yes Movement. The Yes Movement is bigger than the SNP.
Well, I'm not saying that they've tried to.
I didn't think the SNP have set out to manage it. I didn't think the SNP have set out to manage the Yes Movement. I think that's almost a Trojan horse by some people within the Yes Movement who want to lead the Yes Movement and accuse the SNP of doing so. I think the Yes Movement works best when there are no leaders. It's a totally symbiotic relationship between the SNP and Yes, but Yes kind of leads itself. And nobody for the SNP came up with the marches. Nobody for the SNP came up with hanging flags off bridges. You know what I mean? It was just, maybe they were SNP members, right enough, who knows, but it was just people within the Yes Movement that came up with these things. Yes Stones has nothing to do with the SNP.
I don't think they're trying. I think the Yes Movement worries them. I do. I think they would like to be able to manage it. What political party wouldn't like to be in control of that group of people, you know? But yeah, I don't think they are. I don't think they are. What I always find quite strange about people who you know, they're trying to control the Yes Movement tend to be the same people that say we need a plan. Why aren't the SNP giving us a plan? It all seems very contradictory.
Okay, wait a minute. All right, Norrie. You're claiming their management has been exemplary. Well, how come look at what happened to the Labour Party. They overmanaged the Labour Party from Neil Kinnock on, and they've barely, well, apart from Tony Blair, they've not been in power. It would appear to me the SNP at the top have overmanaged the SNP, and they've had to, for example, they had to postpone their spring conference. I mean, this is a different time now with coronavirus. And then they decided to put on a wee conference in Abbeymoor in the summer for a limited number of people. This was over-managing even the SNP.
I think you've gone up a dead-end alley there with that one, mate. The reality of that was parties skint. They can't afford a 3-day conference, and the members aren't willing to fund a 3-day conference, so having a 3-day spring conference would have been daft anyway.
I mean, the reality of it is what's best for the SNP. Now, your management team makes that decision. You don't like that decision, you change the management team. That's up to the SNP. All management teams will protect their position in any way they can in any political party. Nothing different there with the SNP. So I'm not really sure why anybody's surprised that they manipulate timetables, etc., to protect their positions.
Look, don't forget nobody's mentioning the name. Who was actually the chief executive? In other words, the #1 manager in the SNP, Peter Murrell.
No, this one again.
Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband.
Right. So you want rid of him? Vote him out. Well, I mean, it's a democracy, Stuart. Vote him out. Get support to get rid of him. And if you can't get support to get rid of him, he stays.
I'm not leading any campaign. I'm retired.
Well, my point is that the majority of the SNP must be happy with Murrell being there, or they would bump him. That's democracy.
See, going back to Craig Murray just for a second. I've had a bit of pushback for people online who really didn't like what Craig Murray had to say, and their pushback's been pretty coordinated. It's all been lines about, by supporting Salmond, you're putting women's rights back 50 years. And I do hate the piety of somebody coming out with some nonsense like that. By supporting an innocent man who's been found innocent in a court of law, you're somehow putting women's rights back or making it more difficult for women to come forward. That's absolute nonsense. And let's be clear, these women that accused Mr. Salmond and failed to get any conviction whatsoever on any of the charges, they got more support for Police Scotland and the Crown Office than many, many other victims would ever get. I mean, there was what was it Craig Murray said, a 22-strong team of police interviewed 400 people, and they got nothing. They found nothing to add to their charge sheet. The charges all came for that small group of women.
Well, I think, just to correct you slightly there on that, Jeremy, they found nothing to charge the First Minister with. And then along came the civil service, Liz Evans and her coterie at the top, and produced a dossier by these 9 or 10 women. And this was the only evidence that the court case was based on. So you're right, the police did not find enough to even charge Alex Salmond.
And the one, Stuart, that people have hinted at for God only knows how long in the media about a certain incident that happened at Edinburgh Airport and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out, according to Craig Murray, that it was a comment about a lassie's shoes. He went, that's a killer pair of heels.
Yeah.
And they're somehow saying that was in some way a sexist or a sexual innuendo. That is laughable. No wonder that didn't make a charge sheet.
I think one of the problems that we're having is that we don't understand the number of women that have been abused in one way or another who haven't been listened to.
I think
and as a result of that, we're now in the position where every woman who believes what's happened to her is unreasonable wants to be able to go into court, make the accusation, and the person to be punished. The definitions of what constitute attempted rape, sexual assault, seem to have expanded from where I'm sitting, seem to have expanded, you know, tugging somebody's hair, making a comment about their heels, you know, all that kind of thing. You know, smacking somebody on the bum is assault. Is it sexual assault?
Not really.
You know, I don't know. And I think this is an area that needs to be cleaned up. Because
I think you're right, Norrie.
My hands are going in my pockets.
Nobody's getting
a kiss on the cheek.
But can I just say that just for what you came up with there, something popped into my head. You could be right, but and given that this all kind of happened around the Weinstein and the Me Too movement and that, is it possible that rather than it kicking off as a political conspiracy, this was Leslie Evans and her chum at the top of the Scottish Civil Service thinking, hold it, they've maybe heard a couple of wee whispers about Mr. Salmond being difficult to work with, and they thought they could cement their place amongst the feminist hierarchy within the UK civil service, because there is definitely a movement towards feminism in some women in positions of power. And maybe they thought a nice wee cause celeb to attach themselves to could lift them up to. I mean, Leslie Evans is ambitious. She wants to go to the top of the UK civil service, not the top of the Scottish civil service. This could all been a wee power play for her. And then she's roped in these women who some of them didn't want to come forward, apparently. They'd never thought that it was in any way sexual when these incidents happened. There could just be that ambition is behind this rather than a political motive.
I've no idea. And until the names of the women who made the accusations come out, it's very difficult to make a judgment on what their motivation was. I mean, the presumption that the only motivation possible is the fact that they felt they'd been abused is simplistic, I think.
Well,
but
it's not just simplistic, mate. It's wrong because a couple of them said in their own evidence that they didn't consider Alex Salmond's action to be inappropriate until it was put to them that it was inappropriate.
Well, that's kind of the point I was going to make. Because the goalposts seem to have changed, what was, I don't know, the word that's been bandied about, a bit creepy, is now sexual assault. Well, I hope somebody decides to write down the definition and let us all know.
Yeah, it'd help immensely. And can I just say to the people that are watching and listening as well, didn't think for a second that any of us take any of this not in a serious manner. We're just looking at it purely from the politics point of what's been going on. The actual treatment of women in society and in workplaces has improved greatly in Scotland over the last 20 years, but it's still got a long way to go.
Well, yeah, but there's the element as well where, you're now scared.
Aye.
To be in any way tactile in case it's misconstrued. So effectively, every woman now has a meter barrier around her, just in case you fall out and she decides that when you took her hand to look at her engagement ring, that was some sort of sexual move. It's confusing, is the truth of it. And us old dogs, Stuart, I include you in this, certainly come from another time when what was acceptable has changed, and you realize it's changed, but
but not really. We're still wrong in this sense. Three old men talking about women's issues at length. As long as we keep it on the politics, we're okay. But I think it's wrong for us to go on at length about women's issues like this.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. It would have been nice if we'd planned ahead and maybe got Jay or somebody to come on with us to.
Well, I'll give Jay a ring.
Well, she's definitely got Zoom, mate. I know that for a fact because she mentioned it the other night.
I'll give Jay a ring and see if we can get her on for a chat about this, because she's also an HR professional.
Yeah, exactly.
And she might be able to help us out with what standards apply. I would doubt there's anything in black and white, because it's such an individual thing, it will be up to the individual to decide what's appropriate, I suppose. But that's scary, because what you think might be reasonable, you don't find out isn't reasonable until it's too late.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think Stuart's right. I think we better leave it alone. Anything else pop into your timelines in the last 24 hours?
I just wanted to give a shout out to people who, I know the figures this morning weren't brilliant, but figures in general in Scotland and the UK have not climbed in a massive exponential way that we may have expected so far. A massive shout out to people who've been socially isolating in a positive manner. But I would just want to say to people, because I am getting a bit tired of folk on the old social media clipping on people playing tennis in Leith Links or all this malarkey. Go and watch On the Buses, the old 70s programme, and please, for God's sake, Stop being Blakeys. Try to be a bit more Stan. Too many Blakeys out there.
That takes me back. God, that man never smiled, did he?
He did not, no.
Stuart.
Not today. No, I'm not today.
Not today. Okay. So, politics is dead, boys. Okay, folks. Thanks, Jimmy Hutton. Thanks, Stuart Lockhead. I'm Norris Stewart. Thanks for listening. And don't get too upset by old farts discussing feminism, please. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow. Cheers for now.
Cheerio.